Stephanie Whitfield was 24 when her mother slapped her across the face so hard that the sound cracked through the kitchen like a dropped plate. For a moment, everything tilted. Her ears rang sharply, her cheek burned, and she tasted blood where her tooth caught the inside of her lip. She staggered back, gripping the counter to stay upright. It was the first time Susan Whitfield had ever hit her, and the shock of it lingered longer than the pain. Robert Whitfield stood frozen in the doorway, his work boots still on, grease staining the cuffs of his jeans. He did not rush forward. He did not ask if she was hurt. He looked straight at her and said, calmly and without hesitation, cold as ice, "His future actually matters. Yours never did." The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting ever could. Somewhere behind them, her younger brother Evan watched, unseen but present. Stephanie did not look at him. She turned, picked up her keys, her insurance folder for the doctor's appointment she had waited months to get, and walked out of the house without another word. Before I continue, I need to ask you a quick favor. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support truly makes a difference. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It's completely free. Like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. That single click helps this channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you stories like this. At the time, Stephanie was still living in the split-level house on the edge of an Orlando suburb, the kind of neighborhood where palm trees lined identical streets and every family pretended stability came easily. The outside looked calm. Inside, it never was. Stephanie worked double shifts just to survive. Mornings were spent at a crowded breakfast diner, moving non-stop between tables, smiling through exhaustion while her feet ached. Evenings were filled with delivery work, navigating traffic in her aging sedan, the smell of takeout clinging to the seats. Tips helped, but after gas, phone bills, and medical expenses, there was never much left. Still, every first of the month, she handed her parents $300 in cash for rent. They had started charging her the day she turned 18. There had been no discussion, no alternative offered. Paying was the price of staying. Complaining only made things worse. Stephanie told herself it was temporary, that she just needed time to get on her feet. She kept her head down and focused on getting through each week. Evan, on the other hand, never paid a cent. At 20, he was still enrolled part-time at community college, stretching a 2-year program into its 4th year without urgency. He slept until noon most days, wandered into the kitchen in expensive hoodies Susan bought for him, and spent hours gaming or meeting friends. Robert had gifted him a used but well-kept pickup truck the year before, far nicer than anything Stephanie had ever owned. The payments came from a family account no one discussed. Dinner was usually the only time all four were together. Susan always set an extra plate aside for Evan, even if he came late. When he finished eating, he left his dishes on the table and disappeared upstairs. Stephanie cleared them every night. If she didn't, Susan made her displeasure known with loud sighs and pointed remarks. "You're the reliable one," Robert often said when Stephanie handled things quietly. He meant it as praise. What it really meant was that she was expected to manage on her own while they focused on Evan. Stephanie had health issues that required regular monitoring, including thyroid problems she had dealt with since her teens. Appointments, labs, and medication added up quickly. Doctors encouraged her to pursue nursing, a stable career with benefits that could support her long-term health. She believed them. Quietly, she began saving every extra dollar in a separate account her parents didn't know about. Most nights, she returned home after 10, collapsed onto the narrow bed in the smallest upstairs bedroom, and stared at the ceiling while the air conditioner hummed. Through the wall, she could hear Evan's games, explosions muffled by laughter. One night, after a particularly long shift, she came home and heard her parents talking in the living room. She paused just out of sight. Susan mentioned transferring more money for Evan's course fees, casually referring to an education account. Robert agreed without hesitation, praising Evan's potential. Stephanie stood there, heart pounding. She remembered asking about college money years earlier and being told there was none. The realization settled slowly and painfully. The account had always existed. It had simply never been meant for her. The next morning, Stephanie prepared for her long-scheduled endocrinology appointment, a visit she could not afford to delay. Evan wandered into the kitchen and asked for a ride to campus, complaining that his truck was low on gas. When she refused, explaining the importance of her appointment, his irritation was immediate. Susan intervened, accusing Stephanie of being selfish and unsupportive. Words escalated quickly. Then Susan struck her. When Robert arrived moments later, he dismissed the red mark forming on Stephanie's face and sided with Evan without question. He told her to move the appointment, to prioritize family. That was when something in Stephanie finally broke. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She gathered her things and left. The doctor noticed the injury and offered resources, but Stephanie declined, focused only on getting through the visit. Before she left, Dr. Stephanie Morris mentioned a hospital-sponsored training program for nursing assistants with paid education and benefits. It was the first genuine opportunity Stephanie had been offered in years, and for the first time that day, she felt a quiet sense of possibility. Stephanie sent her resume that same night, adjusting it carefully on her aging laptop while sitting alone in her bedroom. She listed years of customer service, long hours, and reliability, traits she had never been praised for at home but knew mattered elsewhere. 2 days later, she received a call inviting her to interview for the hospital's paid nursing assistant training cohort. The interview took place the following week in a plain conference room with beige walls and a long table scarred by years of use. Daniel Brooks, the program manager, asked direct questions about her work history, her health needs, and how she handled pressure. Stephanie answered honestly. She spoke about exhaustion, about learning to stay calm under stress, and about wanting a career that offered stability instead of survival. When he noticed the fading bruise on her cheek, he didn't pry, only asked if she was safe. She told him the situation was handled. He nodded once. 2 days later, an email arrived offering her a spot in the program. Training would start Monday. It came with paid instruction, benefits after certification, and a clear path forward. Stephanie accepted immediately, knowing this was not just a job offer. It was an exit. Leaving home happened quietly. For the first week of training, Stephanie slept on a co-worker's couch, her belongings packed into her trunk. The work was demanding from day one, early mornings, clinical practice, constant evaluation, but it felt different from exhaustion she had known before. This time, effort led somewhere. Samuel Ortiz, her assigned clinical mentor, was firm and precise, correcting mistakes without raising his voice. When she improved, he acknowledged it with a nod and moved on. No favoritism. No cruelty. Just standards. During a break one afternoon, Daniel Brooks overheard Stephanie mention her temporary living situation. After the shift, he pulled her aside and told her about a retired maintenance worker named Walter Simmons who rented out a small room above his garage. The place wasn't fancy, but it was clean, private, and affordable. Stephanie moved in the next day. The room was small, with a narrow bed and a single window, but the door locked. That night, she ate instant noodles sitting on the floor and slept uninterrupted for the first time in years. The silence felt unfamiliar, but safe. As weeks passed, the contrast between her old life and her new one grew sharper. Stephanie controlled her own schedule, bought her own groceries, and studied without interruption. No one criticized her for resting. No one demanded explanations for her time. She picked up the routine quickly, vital signs, patient care, charting, with a focus sharpened by necessity. The hospital environment was strict but fair, and Stephanie thrived in it. 2 months into the program, her first paycheck arrived. It wasn't large, but it was hers. She decided it was time to open a bank account solely in her name. At the branch downtown, the teller's polite smile faded after reviewing her information. A manager was called. He explained there were serious negative marks on her credit file, accounts, balances, and loans she didn't recognize. Stephanie left the bank stunned. That evening, using Walter's old desktop computer, she requested her full credit reports. When the envelopes arrived days later, the truth unfolded in stark detail. Thousands of dollars in debt, all in her name. Purchases tied directly to her parents' address. Her mother's handwriting on forged applications. Her father's business expenses disguised as personal charges. It wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. Stephanie sat on the edge of the bed, papers spread around her like evidence from a crime scene. The realization settled slowly but completely. Her parents had not only controlled her present, they had sabotaged her future. A coworker told her about a legal aid clinic downtown that handled identity theft cases. Stephanie made an appointment and met with Natalie Pierce, an attorney who reviewed the documents carefully. Natalie explained the process step by step: police report, fraud affidavits, credit freezes, disputes. She did not soften the truth. Pursuing the case would likely lead to criminal charges. Stephanie would have to be ready for that. Stephanie asked for time. For 3 nights, she barely slept, replaying memories with new understanding. The missed certification exam after her car mysteriously failed. The constant pressure to stay dependent. The slap. Robert's words. On the fourth day, she called Natalie back. She was ready. The police report was filed. Investigators moved quickly once they saw the volume and documentation. Surveillance footage from Robert's auto shop confirmed deliberate tampering with Stephanie's car years earlier. What once felt like suspicion now had proof. The damage had been intentional. The investigation unraveled everything. Robert's business records showed years of fraud and unpaid taxes. Susan's emails linked her directly to the credit applications. Evan benefited from the money but had not signed the accounts himself. Charges were filed. Robert was arrested. Susan was placed under investigation. Stephanie continued training throughout the process, refusing to let chaos pull her backward. Months later, the case reached court. Stephanie sat quietly as the evidence was presented: bank records, forged signatures, footage from the shop. Robert showed no remorse, only frustration at being exposed. Susan cried on the stand but never denied her actions. The judge was unmoved. Robert received a prison sentence. Susan was given probation and ordered to repay restitution. Their house was seized and sold. Evan's truck was repossessed. The life Stephanie had escaped collapsed under its own weight. When it was over, Stephanie didn't feel triumph. She felt relief. Consequences had finally replaced control. She walked out of the courthouse knowing she had chosen herself, and that choice had changed everything. After the trial, Stephanie returned to her routines with a new kind of focus. The noise that once filled her thoughts, anticipation, fear, second-guessing, had quieted. Her parents attempted contact through letters and unfamiliar phone numbers, but she did not respond. Silence became a boundary she guarded carefully. At the hospital, her progress continued. She passed each evaluation on schedule and completed the nursing assistant certification without delay. The work was physically demanding, but it no longer felt punishing. She understood why she was there. Her health stabilized under consistent care, supported by insurance she now controlled. Daniel Brooks encouraged her to apply for the hospital's accelerated associate degree nursing track, a structured path that allowed employees to advance while working. Stephanie hesitated only briefly before submitting her application. She was accepted within the month. The timeline was intense: classes, clinicals, exams, but realistic. It would take time, effort, and discipline. For the first time, no one was standing in her way. She adjusted her schedule, reduced unnecessary expenses, and prepared for another long stretch of work. The difference now was choice. She was building something that belonged entirely to her. Life outside work settled into a quiet rhythm. Stephanie signed a lease on a small studio apartment downtown, modest but bright, with high windows and just enough space to breathe. Her name alone was on the paperwork. No cosigners. No hidden conditions. Furniture came slowly: a thrift table, a used couch, a real bed frame at last. She filled the space with simple comforts: plants on the windowsill, framed photos from her early diner days, a lamp that cast warm light in the evenings. Credit repair took patience. She followed every step Natalie Pierce outlined, sending certified letters, filing disputes, and monitoring reports monthly. Slowly, balances were removed, accounts closed, and her score began to recover. The process was frustrating, but measurable. Each small improvement felt earned. Evan tried reaching out once through a mutual acquaintance, asking for help with rent. Stephanie declined without explanation. She no longer felt responsible for fixing what she hadn't broken. That role had ended. Her focus stayed forward, anchored by work, study, and the quiet confidence growing beneath both. 2 years later, Stephanie completed the nursing program. Exam day arrived without ceremony. She took the test calmly, methodically, trusting the work she had put in. When the results posted online, she checked once, then again, just to be sure. She had passed. The hospital offered her a full-time position in the emergency department, and she accepted. The pace was relentless: long shifts, high stakes, constant motion. But it suited her. She had learned how to stay steady in chaos. Colleagues respected her work ethic and her boundaries. She shared pieces of her past selectively, never for sympathy, only context. Her thyroid condition remained manageable, monitored regularly without financial strain. On her days off, she cooked meals she liked, took walks in the early evening heat, and slept deeply. She drove a reliable used hatchback she paid for herself. No strings. No explanations. The life she had imagined in fragments was now real, assembled piece by piece through deliberate effort. Occasionally, news of her family surfaced through others. Robert served his sentence and was released quietly, his business permanently closed. Susan worked temporary jobs to meet probation requirements, moving between small apartments. Evan drifted from place to place, working inconsistent hours and blaming circumstances for his situation. Stephanie felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only distance. She had grieved the loss of the family she wished she'd had long before the court ever intervened. When letters arrived expressing regret without accountability, she set them aside unread. Healing, she had learned, did not require reconciliation. It required honesty and separation. Her life now was defined by consistency, not crisis. She mentored new hires the way Samuel Ortiz had mentored her: clear expectations, firm corrections, respect without favoritism. Watching others find their footing reminded her how far she had come. Strength, she realized, wasn't loud. It was built quietly, over time, through choices repeated even when no one was watching. On the anniversary of the day she left her parents' house, Stephanie finished a late shift and drove home under a darkening sky. She unlocked her apartment, set her bag down, and stood for a moment in the stillness. There was no anger left in her, no urge to revisit the past. Only clarity. Walking away had not been abandonment. It had been self-preservation. The consequences her parents faced were not acts of revenge. They were the natural result of years of manipulation and theft. Stephanie had simply stopped absorbing the damage. She turned on a lamp, made tea, and sat by the window, watching the city settle for the night. Her life was not perfect. It was honest. It was stable. And it was hers. The future no longer felt like something she had to beg for or earn permission to enter. It unfolded one deliberate step at a time, shaped by boundaries she would never again allow to be crossed. Stephanie's days settled into a rhythm shaped by intention rather than obligation. 12-hour shifts in the emergency department demanded focus and stamina, but they also offered something she had never known before: professional trust. Doctors relied on her assessments. Patients responded to her calm presence. She learned when to speak up and when to act without hesitation. Outside work, she kept her world deliberately small. A few co-workers became friends. Weekend mornings were slow, spent grocery shopping or reading near the window with coffee growing cold beside her. She no longer flinched when her phone buzzed. Numbers tied to her past stayed blocked. Boundaries, once frightening, now felt natural. Therapy, which she began quietly through hospital benefits, helped her name what she had lived through without excusing it. She learned that loyalty did not mean endurance, and family did not mean access. The guilt that once followed every decision faded as she replaced it with clarity. She was not rebuilding to prove anything. She was maintaining a life that finally felt safe. The credit repair process reached its final stages the following year. Stephanie received confirmation that the last fraudulent account had been removed. Her score, once damaged beyond recognition, now reflected years of responsible behavior. She applied for a credit card in her own name and was approved without hesitation. The card stayed mostly unused, symbolic more than practical. She framed the approval letter and tucked it into a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what honesty and patience could repair. Natalie Pierce checked in once more, congratulating her on closing the chapter completely. Stephanie thanked her and meant it. Justice had not restored what was taken, but it had stopped the damage from spreading further. That mattered. The system had worked, imperfectly but firmly, because she had chosen to speak instead of staying silent. The quiet satisfaction of that choice stayed with her far longer than anger ever had. Years passed without confrontation or reconciliation. Stephanie heard nothing directly from her parents after that. The absence no longer felt like loss. It felt like space. She advanced steadily at work, taking on more responsibility, training new staff, and earning respect through consistency rather than performance. Her health remained stable, monitored without crisis or delay. She traveled occasionally, short trips taken alone or with friends who knew her present, not her past. When asked about family, she answered simply, "We're not in contact." No explanations followed. She had learned that closure did not require consensus. It required acceptance. Some relationships ended not with shouting, but with understanding that returning would cost too much. One quiet evening, Stephanie sat in her apartment reviewing paperwork for a future goal she had recently allowed herself to consider: advanced certification. The thought no longer felt unreachable or reckless. It felt earned. She paused, looking around the room she had built from scratch.
Nothing extravagant.
Everything intentional. The memory of that morning in the kitchen surfaced briefly, no longer sharp, just factual.
A turning point. Walking out had not been dramatic.
It had been deliberate. She understood now that survival sometimes looked like leaving without permission and never explaining yourself again.
Strength did not announce itself.
It showed up later, in stability, in peace, in the ability to sit alone without fear. Stephanie closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and prepared for bed. Outside, the city hummed softly, indifferent and steady. Her life no longer revolved around proving her worth or absorbing someone else's failures.
It moved forward because she chose it to.
The past remained where it belonged, acknowledged, resolved, and sealed. Walking away from her family had not made her cold. It had made her free. And freedom, she had learned, was not loud. It was quiet, consistent, and strong enough to last. Some families teach love through care. Others teach survival through distance. Walking away from toxic family isn't cruelty. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is close a door that was never meant to protect you. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and it helps us keep sharing more stories. And if you've lived through something similar, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone.